Thanksgiving. We're told it's a time for gratitude, for family, for the warm glow of a shared feast, a blanket of comfort against the approaching winter. But what about the empty chairs? The houses where the only sound is the ticking clock and the whisper of the wind? Not everyone is celebrating. Not every table is full. And in that silence, in that isolation, other things can gather. Stories aren't just told around the dinner table. Sometimes they happen in the shadows just beyond it. Tonight on Folklore Files, we're setting a place at the table for the forgotten, the strange, and the paranormal. Because while most people are giving thanks, others are just trying to make it through the long, dark night. So if you're ready to explore the darker side of this holiday, stay with us. And if any of the stories we share tonight send a chill down your spine, we invite you to let us know in the comments. Subscribe to Folklore Files for more tales from the shadows, and give this video a like. It truly helps our channel grow. Most of us accept a dinner invitation out of politeness or a desire for community. But for one young woman, an invitation to a Thanksgiving dinner became the prelude to a nightmare she could never have imagined. This is the story of Rachel and Mark. It began on a crisp November afternoon. Rachel and her boyfriend, Mark, had just moved into a quiet, tree-lined neighborhood, hoping to find a fresh start. Their next-door neighbors, the Adlers, were an older, intensely friendly couple who had immediately taken an interest in them. When Thanksgiving rolled around and learned the young couple had no family in the state, the Adlers insisted they join their table. It was, they said, what neighbors were for. Rachel, however, had been plagued by a persistent stomach ailment for days. Her doctor had been clear: a bland diet, nothing rich, no heavy foods. She accepted the invitation more for Mark's sake than her own, planning to mostly just push the food around her plate. The Adler house was warm, almost oppressively so, and smelled overpoweringly of roasted herbs and spices. The table was set for 6. Another young couple, also neighbors, was there, quiet and observant. The mood was attentive, too attentive. As the feast was laid out, the Adlers focused their attention on Mark. They piled his plate high with turkey, stuffing, and a dark, glistening cranberry sauce they seemed particularly proud of. Rachel politely declined, explaining her medical condition, but their insistence soon crossed the line from hospitable to desperate. "Just a little taste, Mark," Mrs. Adler urged, her smile not quite reaching her eyes. "It's a family recipe. It will fortify your spirit." Rachel watched, a knot of unease tightening in her stomach that had nothing to do with her illness. She noticed the other young couple exchanging a silent, knowing glance, but Mark, ever the gracious guest, dug in with enthusiasm. It started subtly. The lively glint in Mark's eyes began to dim. His laughter at a joke faded mid-breath. He became still, unnervingly so. His responses turned to monosyllabic grunts and then to silence. He sat in his chair, upright but vacant, his gaze fixed on nothing. "Mark," she said, her voice tight with alarm. "Honey, are you okay?" He didn't respond. A drop of sweat traced a path down his temple. The Adlers watched him with an expression that made her blood run cold. It wasn't concern. It was assessment. "He's just full and tired," Mr. Adler said, his voice a low, soothing murmur that felt anything but soothing. "The tryptophan, you know." But Rachel knew this was not fatigue. This was something else, something wrong. Her every instinct screamed at her to get him out. She stood up abruptly, her chair scraping against the floor, I think he's having a severe allergic reaction. I need to get him home, now." She expected protest, but the Adlers simply nodded, their faces unreadable. The other couple remained silent. With a strength born of pure adrenaline, she managed to get Mark to his feet and half walk, half drag him out of the house and across the lawn to their own home. The entire time, she felt their eyes on her back from the Adler's window. Inside, she immediately called 911. Her voice was shaking as she gave the address, but her mind was terrifyingly clear. "I think they put something in his food," she whispered to the operator, before loudly stating for anyone who might be listening, "He must be allergic to something he ate." She stood guard over Mark's catatonic form, every muscle tensed, waiting for a door to burst open, for the Adlers to come for them. But the only thing that arrived was the ambulance. At the hospital, the doctors found nothing. No toxins, no allergens, no drugs in his system. Medically, Mark was perfectly fine, yet he was a shell. He was discharged days later, quiet and withdrawn, a ghost of the man he had been. And that's when the house itself seemed to awaken. It began with small, inexplicable things. A framed photograph would be found face down on the floor in the morning. The distinct sound of heavy, deliberate footsteps would echo from the upstairs hallway when they were both downstairs. Whispers seemed to weave through the hum of the furnace. Mark's condition didn't improve. He would often stare out the back window into the yard, a vacant horror in his eyes. Rachel started having friends over, both for company and as witnesses. They heard the footsteps. They saw objects move. The oppressive atmosphere was undeniable. The breaking point came one evening during the golden hour. Rachel was in the living room when a movement in the backyard caught her eye. She turned to the large patio window. There, cast against the warm, sunlit grass, was a shadow. But it was all wrong. The sun was behind the house, not in front of it. This shadow was being cast toward the window from a source that wasn't there. It was the silhouette of a gaunt bipedal creature with twisted horns and a head that was disturbingly goat-like. It stood for a moment, a stain upon the daylight, and then it was gone. Terrified and out of options, Rachel went to her local church. She poured out the whole story to a sympathetic priest. The dinner, Mark's illness, the shadow, the phenomena. The priest listened gravely. He told her it sounded less like a random haunting and more like a targeted affliction. A pact, perhaps. A ritual that required a specific offering. The Adlers hadn't just wanted to poison Mark, they had wanted to consecrate him. And Rachel, by refusing the food, had inadvertently saved herself while leaving her boyfriend as a vulnerable open door. With this horrifying confirmation, Rachel knew they had to leave. They put the house on the market the very next week. The real estate agent was skeptical. The market was slow. But within days, an offer came in. It was from the Adlers. The price was slightly below asking, a subtle insult, but the message was clear. The house was always meant to be theirs. Exhausted and traumatized, Rachel and Mark accepted. They never learned the full truth. Was the house always a focal point for something dark, and the Adlers were its caretakers? Or was the ritual at the Thanksgiving dinner meant to bind them to the property, to the entity? Rachel didn't know, but she was certain of one thing. The Adlers hadn't just wanted their house. That Thanksgiving, they had wanted a sacrifice. And they had very nearly gotten two. A friendly dinner with a hidden, horrifying agenda. It makes you wonder about the true intentions behind a smiling face, doesn't it? For some, the holidays are a reminder of what they lack. For others, they are a sanctuary from what they've escaped. This is the story of Leo, a young man for whom a silent, empty university dormitory was a far greater blessing than a noisy family table could ever be. Leo had not gone home for Thanksgiving. He had no intention of going home for Christmas either. Home was a dirty word, a synonym for a cramped, clapboard house in a dying town, filled with the sour smell of cheap beer and the echoing thunder of his parents' rage. They had been his first and most relentless bullies, targeting his scrawny frame, his thick glasses, and his quiet nature with a cruelty that was both casual and calculated. His entire life had been a focused campaign of escape. While other boys were out playing sports, he was studying, his face buried in books. His poor eyesight and thin arms made him a liability on any team, but his mind was sharp and relentless. That mind earned him a scholarship, a golden ticket out. And his years of working any job he could find since he was 16 meant he secured a night shift at a grocery store near the university within his first week. He was free. His parents had never called, not when he left, not to check if he was alive. He prayed the silence would hold. And so he found himself alone in the sprawling, ancient university dormitory over the Thanksgiving break. The building, usually a hive of chaotic energy, was now a tomb. The heating system groaned and clanked, fighting a losing battle against the bitter cold that had gripped the city. The wind whistled through old window frames, a lonely sound that suited Leo's mood perfectly. This silence was peaceful. This emptiness was safe. He was returning from his shift around 11 p.m., the cold air biting at his cheeks, his breath pluming in the dimly lit streets. The walk back to his dorm was through a deserted campus, the old Gothic buildings looking like sleeping giants under the moonless sky. He let himself into the main door, the lock echoing with a final heavy thud. The hallway leading to his room was long, lit by flickering fluorescent lights that cast more shadows than illumination. It was then that he saw her, a woman far down at the other end of the corridor, turning a corner. She was dressed in a long, outdated dress, the style of a century past, a dull, grayish fabric that seemed to swallow the light. He caught only a glimpse, a pale ankle, the swirl of a hem, before she disappeared. Leo, pragmatic and weary, shrugged it off. Probably some history professor or a student in a period costume for some theater project. Strange, but not alarming. He continued to his room, the incident already fading from his mind. Sleep, however, had other plans. He was jerked awake hours later by a sound that drilled directly into his primal brain, the sharp, distinct click-clack of hard-heeled shoes on the linoleum floor of the hallway. Click-clack, click-clack. It was a slow, deliberate walk, pacing up and down the corridor. Who would be walking like that at this hour in an empty dorm? He lay still, his heart hammering against his ribs. The footsteps passed his door, faded down the hall, then turned and came back, again and again. After the third pass, a spark of anger, the same stubborn defiance that had gotten him out of his hometown, overrode his fear. He wasn't going to be intimidated in his own sanctuary. Silently, he slipped out of bed and crept to his door. He pressed his ear against the cold wood. The footsteps were right outside. Click-clack, click-clack. He held his breath, waiting for them to recede. The moment they did, he yanked the door open, ready to confront the prankster. The hallway was empty. Profoundly, impossibly empty. It stretched in both directions, silent and still under the harsh, unwavering lights. There was nowhere to hide, no doors that could have opened and closed in time. A cold dread, colder than the winter air outside, began to seep into his bones. He stood there for a moment, baffled, before stepping back inside. Just as he was about to close the door, a new thought occurred to him, a need for absolute certainty. He decided to take one last look, to assure his racing mind that it was all just a trick of the old building. He pulled the door open again, and there she was. Facing him, not a foot away, stood the woman in the old dress. But now he could see her clearly. Her form was semi-transparent, a pale smear against the reality of the hallway. Her dress was not gray, but a faded funereal black. Her skin was the color of old milk, and her eyes were dark, hollow pits. She wasn't floating, she was standing, solid and real, yet he could see the faint pattern of the wall through her shoulder. She was simply staring at him, her head tilted slightly, her expression of vacant, ancient curiosity. A strangled scream ripped from Leo's throat, a sound he didn't recognize as his own. He slammed the door shut with such force the frame shuddered. He scrambled back, fumbling for the lock, his hands shaking uncontrollably. He didn't sleep another second that night. He sat on his bed, every light in the small room blazing, staring at the door until the pale, gray light of dawn finally filtered through the window. The next day, exhausted and humiliated by his own fear, he found an elderly janitor mopping the main lobby. With a face flushed with embarrassment, he stammered out a question. "Excuse me, does this place, have any ghosts?" He described the woman, the dress, the clicking heels. The janitor paused his mopping, leaning on the handle. He didn't laugh. Instead, he nodded slowly, a look of weary recognition on his face. "Ah, you've seen the Gray Lady. Yeah, this old place has its permanent residents. She's been here longer than any of us. Is she dangerous?" he asked, his voice barely a whisper. The old man shrugged. "Never known her to hurt anyone. Mostly she just walks. They say she's looking for her fiancé who never returned from the Great War. They're mostly harmless, these ghosts. They don't mean any trouble. Still," he added, seeing the panic still etched on his face, "gives me the willies too when I see one. Don't blame you for being spooked." Leo thanked him and walked away, the man's words settling in his mind. Mostly harmless. Don't mean any trouble. He thought about it all day. The chilling apparition, the phantom footsteps in the dead of night. It was terrifying. It was unnatural. But then he thought of home, the very real, very tangible terror of his father's drunken shouts, the sound of a bottle smashing against a wall, the sharp, stinging pain of a backhand. The constant grinding anxiety of never being safe, never being good enough. That night back in his dorm, the silence felt different. It was a listening silence. He lay in bed, waiting. And then, right on schedule, he heard it. Click-clack, click-clack. A cold shiver ran down his spine. His breath hitched, but he didn't get up. He didn't lock his door. He just listened. And he realized something with the clarity of a mathematical equation. The ghost in the hallway was a mystery, a phenomenon. It was fear, but it was a simple, clean fear. It wasn't personal. It wasn't malicious. It just was. His parents, however, were a certainty. Their violence was a deliberate personal poison. As the spectral footsteps paced their endless route outside his door, Leo pulled his blanket tighter. The sound was eerie, unsettling, a whisper from the grave. But it was a far gentler lullaby than the screaming and the blows he had left behind. He would take the ghost 1,000 times over, He would choose this hollow, haunted piece every single time. Family traditions are meant to be a comfort, a tether to our past. But what happens when that tether is tied to something dark? This is the story of Maya, for whom the annual Thanksgiving pilgrimage to her grandparents' farm was not a celebration, but a trial of terror, a secret she had to endure for the sake of family. Maya loved her grandparents deeply. Their hugs were warm, their stories rich with history, and their farm was a picturesque postcard of rolling hills and rustic barns. But to Maya, it was a beautiful prison. From her earliest memories, the farm held a specific, chilling horror that was hers alone to witness. It was the woman at the window. The guest room where she slept with her parents and her younger sister was on the second floor. The large, old oak tree outside didn't have branches near the window. There was no porch roof beneath it. Yet repeatedly, Maya would see her, a woman with lank, dark hair and a face the color of old bone, floating outside the pane. Her form was silhouetted against the deep country night, her eyes just dark smudges, her mouth a grim, lipless line. She didn't move. She simply hovered, a silent sentinel of malice. Maya had tried to tell her family when she was small. Her parents dismissed it as night terrors, an overactive imagination fueled by the farm's unfamiliar sounds. Her younger sister would just bury her head under the pillows. Her grandparents would change the subject, their smiles tight with a nervousness she couldn't understand then. As she grew older, she stopped telling them. She began to suspect she had a sensitivity. She'd seen fleeting shadows in other places, felt presences in old buildings. But those were whispers. The woman at the farm was a scream directly into her soul. The fear she felt was pure and primal, a certainty that this entity, given the chance, would do her harm. The woman was cunning. She only appeared when Maya was alone in the room, or when everyone else was asleep. When Maya, in a fit of defiant bravery, would turn her back and try to ignore the apparition, that's when the knocking would start. Not a gentle tap, but a violent, insistent bang, 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 as if a fist of stone was hammering against the glass, threatening to shatter it into 1,000 shards. Last Thanksgiving, Maya decided she was done being a victim. She was 17, and she had a plan. She wouldn't fight the woman with belief or courage. She would fight her with technology. She packed her high-end noise-canceling headphones. If she couldn't see her and couldn't hear her, the ghost could rage all she wanted. And if she did break the window, she thought with a grim satisfaction, then everyone would have to believe her. The evidence would be literal and broken all over the floor. That evening, she didn't go up to the room alone. She waited until her entire family was settled. The farmhouse was full. Her parents and sister in her room, her aunts, uncles, and cousins in the other 2 bedrooms, and her Uncle David, his wife and their son who lived there permanently, helping with the farm. The house was a fortress of family, and for the first time she felt a sliver of safety. She went to bed with the headphones on, a blanket of blessed silence enveloping her. She played white noise, the sound of rain, and closed her eyes victorious. She had outsmarted the nightmare. her victory was short-lived. She was torn from a deep sleep by a violent shaking. Her mother's hands were on her shoulders, her face a mask of panic in the dim light. Maya ripped off the headphones. The sound was overwhelming. The entire window pane was rattling in its frame, not from wind, but from a series of percussive, furious blows. Thump! 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 It was the sound of someone trying to break in. Maya's heart froze. Her gaze, against her will, was dragged to the window. The woman was there, closer than ever before. Her pale hands were pressed against the glass, not as ethereal shadows, but as solid, grimy things. Her dark hair framed a face that was now contorted with a terrifying emotion, and she was looking directly at Maya. As their eyes met, the woman's grimace stretched into a wide, malicious smile. It was a smile of pure, unadulterated hatred, a promise of cruelty. "It's her," Maya whispered, her voice trembling. "It's the witch I always see." Panic erupted. Her father jumped up, ready to throw open the door and confront whatever vandal was outside. But Maya's grandfather, who had appeared at their doorway, his face ashen, stopped him. "No," the grandfather commanded, his voice rough with a fear that silenced the room. "Don't go out. Don't even open this door. Look at her." They all turned back to the window. The woman's expression was no longer just malicious, it was furious. Her eyes seemed to glow with a faint red light. She wasn't just trying to scare them now, she was trying to get in. The grandfather's warning was clear. Stepping outside into her domain would be a fatal mistake. They spent the rest of the night huddled together, lights blazing, as the enraged entity periodically returned to pound on the glass, a relentless reminder of the danger just beyond the fragile barrier of the house. When the pale, tentative light of dawn finally broke, the woman was gone. The family, shell-shocked and exhausted, gathered in the kitchen. The air was thick with a silence heavier than any nightmare. It was then that Maya's grandparents broke down. With tears in their eyes, they confessed. They had seen her too, for decades. They called her the window watcher. They had various protections around the farm, old charms hidden in the door frames, a row of iron horseshoes over the barn door, prayers whispered every night. The entity had never physically harmed them or their animals, contenting itself with these sporadic, terrifying visitations. "We were selfish," her grandmother wept, clutching Maya's hand. "We were so afraid that if we told you, you'd stop coming. We couldn't bear the thought of losing these gatherings, of not having our family whole." Maya looked at their grief-stricken faces, at the decades of fear they had silently carried to keep their family tradition alive. Her own anger melted away, replaced by a profound, aching pity. She forgave them. But a new resolve hardened within her. Forgiveness did not mean acceptance. The truce was over. She would not let this thing torment another generation. Now, armed with the belief of her entire family, Maya is searching. She scours old town records, talks to local historians, and delves into obscure folklore online. She is no longer the scared little girl in the second-floor room. She is a hunter of stories, determined to find the key to the window watcher's identity and finally find a way to banish her from her family's land for good. A family bound not just by love, but by a shared, hidden fear. It makes you wonder what secrets your own family might be keeping. all in the name of staying together. The open road can be a place of freedom, a ribbon of asphalt leading us home, but sometimes that ribbon can twist into a knot, trapping the traveler in a pocket of nightmare from which there seems no escape. This is the story of David, a man who learned that the shortest distance between 2 points isn't always a straight line. Sometimes it's a circle. David was a man defined by his commitments. He had taken a consulting job hours away from his family, and a last-minute crisis had forced him to work through Thanksgiving Day. But a promise was a promise. He had told his wife and kids he would be home for leftover pie and a late-night hug, and he intended to keep it. Armed with a thermos of black coffee and a playlist of driving anthems, he pointed his car home and settled in for a long, solitary night drive. The highway was eerily empty, a concrete river under a canopy of indifferent stars. For the first few hours, it was just him, the hum of the engine and the dashed white lines hypnotizingly flashing by. It was on a desolate stretch of 2-lane road called Larkin Road that he first saw her. A woman walking perilously close to the shoulder. Her long, unkempt hair obscured her face, and she wore a tattered white dress stained with ugly blotches of black and brown, as if she'd been dragged through mud and oil. His instinct, a decent man's instinct, was to slow down and ask if she needed help, but something stopped him. Her pace was relentless, her focus absolute. She never turned, never lifted a hand to hitchhike. If she were in real trouble, he reasoned, she'd signal, she'd look. Relieved by his own logic, he pressed the accelerator and drove on. His relief solidified a mile later when he saw a small, brightly lit sign, the Larkin Inn, vacancy. It was a quaint, if slightly dated, motor court. Of course, he thought, the tension draining from his shoulders. She must work there. Maybe they had a delayed Halloween party, a costume thing. The explanation was tidy, and he clung to it. But 20 minutes later, his blood ran cold. There she was again, the same woman with the dirty white dress, walking with the same determined stride along the exact same stretch of road. And ahead, the same Larkin Inn sign glowed in the darkness. Confusion curdled into a low-grade panic. This was impossible. He hadn't taken any turns. He checked his GPS. The screen was frozen, his location pin stubbornly stuck on a part of the road he'd passed long ago. He fumbled for his phone. No signal. The Maps app refused to load. An hour ago, he had full bars. The road was a vacuum, and he was trapped inside it. The third time he passed her, his hands were slick with sweat on the steering wheel. The fourth time, a whimper escaped his lips. He was in a loop, a perfect, terrifying circuit on this forgotten road, and the woman in white was the dreadful milestone that marked each revolution. On the fifth pass, something changed. As he approached the Larkin Inn, he saw 2 young women standing under the neon vacancy sign, frantically waving their arms, gesturing for him to stop. Desperation overrode caution. He swerved across the empty road and pulled over on the opposite shoulder, rolling down his window just a crack. "You have to stop," one of them yelled over the road. "We've seen you pass 4 times. You're stuck." "Stuck in what?" David shouted back, his voice cracking. "The loop, with her," the other said, pointing a trembling finger down the road where the woman would soon appear. "She's the key. She won't let you leave. She'll keep you driving until you run out of gas, or until—" She trailed off. The first woman picked up the thread, her voice urgent. If you don't trust us, just park in our lot, watch the clock on your dashboard. When she stops coming back, the loop breaks. But you can never be outside your car or the hotel when she crosses the road. She attacks anyone outside. We've never seen anyone survive it." Terrified but out of options, David did as he was told. He pulled into the inn's parking lot, facing the road. The two young women hurried inside. He watched his dashboard clock, 2:35 a.m. And then she came, the woman in white walking her eternal path. As she passed his field of vision, he glanced at the clock, expecting to see 2:36. It read 2:14 a.m. A wave of vertigo washed over him. Time itself was broken here. He had just experienced 21 minutes, yet the clock had rolled back. He sat there, paralyzed by a terror so profound that it was a physical weight on his chest. It happened 2 more times. Each loop felt like an eternity of dread. Each glance at the clock, a fresh plunge into hopelessness. He was a rat in a cosmic maze, and the experiment was breaking his mind. He didn't know what else to do. Logic had failed, technology had failed, so he did the only thing left. He rested his forehead against the steering wheel, closed his eyes, and began to pray. He wasn't a particularly religious man, but his words were a raw, sincere plea for protection, for his family, for a way out. He didn't know how long he sat there, whispering into the silence of his car. A gentle tap on the window made him jump. It was the two women from the inn. "It's okay," one of them said softly. "You can go now. It's 3 a.m. The loop is broken." He looked at his clock. It was indeed 3 a.m. and it was steadily moving forward. The road ahead looked just as it had before, but the oppressive, looping feeling was gone. Shakily, he got out of his car, and what was that? "Who is she?" The women exchanged a weary look. "We don't know much," one admitted. "We just work here. The owner warned us when we started. He's the one who saw someone disappear. We've just learned the rules. Stay inside, help who we can. We don't know how to make her go away, so we just survive her." David thanked them, his gratitude as deep and boundless as the terror he had just endured. He got back in his car and drove. He didn't see the woman again. The GPS flickered back to life, and his phone chirped with delayed notifications. He arrived home as the sun was rising, utterly exhausted, but unable to sleep. The horror of the loop was etched into his nerves. He didn't understand the mechanics of the nightmare, the why or the how, but he held his wife and children a little tighter that day, overwhelmed by a simple, staggering gratitude. He had made it home, and some nightmares you don't have to understand to be thankful you escaped. That concludes our 4 tales of Thanksgiving terror. From a dinner table with a hidden agenda to a dormitory haunted by a gentler fear, a family secret watching from the window, and a road that traps the lost. We've journeyed through the shadows cast by this holiday. If any of these stories unsettled you, or if you've had your own strange experience when the rest of the world was giving thanks, we invite you to share your story in the comments below. Don't forget to subscribe to Folklore Files and ring the bell so you don't miss our next descent into the unknown. And if you enjoyed this gathering of grim tales, please give this video a like. It helps more listeners find our campfire in the dark. Thank you for listening. Until next time, sleep well, if you can.